Among Jacob's 12 sons, Joseph ranked 11th, the eldest son born to Jacob and Rachel, and the most favored by Jacob. Joseph had two strange dreams. One was that he and his brothers were binding wheat sheaves together, and his wheat sheaf stood up, while his brothers' wheat sheaves bowed to his wheat sheaf. The other was that the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed to him. The naive Joseph told his father and brothers about these dreams, and his brothers became more jealous after hearing them and even resented him. One day, the brothers discussed killing Joseph, but the eldest brother disagreed and proposed to throw him into a dry well. At this time, a group of Midianite merchants passed by. Brothers decided to sell Joseph to them as a slave. In order to cover up their crimes, the brothers tore Joseph's colorful coat, stained it with goat blood, and took it home, falsely claiming that Joseph was bitten to death by a wild beast. Jacob was heartbroken when he saw the blood-stained coat. Joseph was sold to Egypt and became a slave in the house of Potiphar, the captain of Pharaoh's guard. God was with Joseph, and he gained Potiphar's trust and was entrusted with important tasks to manage Potiphar's entire property. However, Potiphar's wife lusted after Joseph and tried to seduce him many times. One day, she took advantage of the fact that no one was at home and forcibly grabbed Joseph, but Joseph refused to give in. He threw away his coat and ran away quickly. Potiphar's wife was ashamed of being rejected and falsely accused Joseph of trying to violate her. Potiphar was furious and put Joseph in prison. Although Joseph was in prison, God was still with Joseph, giving him wisdom and grace, so that he also gained the trust of the warden in prison and was entrusted with important tasks to manage other prisoners. Among them, 2 prisoners were Pharaoh's servants. One was the cupbearer and the other was the chief baker. The butler dreamed that there was a grapevine in front of him, with 3 branches on the vine. The branches sprouted, blossomed, and produced ripe grapes. The butler held Pharaoh's cup in his hand, squeezed the grapes into the cup, and handed the wine to Pharaoh. Joseph told the butler that this dream symbolized that Pharaoh would restore him to his original position in 3 days and fill Pharaoh's cup again. The baker dreamed that he had 3 baskets on his head. The top basket contained various foods prepared for Pharaoh, but birds came to peck at the food in the basket. Joseph told the baker that he would be executed in 3 days and birds would peck at his body. Joseph asked the butler to help plead with Pharaoh, but after the butler was released from prison, he threw Joseph's request behind his head and completely forgot about him. 2 years later, Pharaoh dreamed that 7 fat cows were devoured by 7 thin cows in the Nile River, and then he dreamed that 7 full ears of wheat were devoured by 7 withered ears of wheat. But no one could help Pharaoh interpret his dream, and the butler remembered Joseph. Joseph was brought before Pharaoh, and after praying, he told Pharaoh, "Egypt will experience 7 years of great harvests, followed by 7 years of great famine." Joseph suggested that Pharaoh store grain during the harvest to prepare for the coming of famine. Pharaoh admired Joseph's wisdom and God's grace, and appointed Joseph as the prime minister of Egypt, responsible for the grain reserves of the entire country. 7 years later, the famine came as expected, sweeping across Egypt and the surrounding areas. Jacob and his family were also affected by the famine in Canaan, and Jacob sent his sons to Egypt to buy grain. Joseph saw his brothers coming to buy grain, but his brothers failed to recognize him as the prime minister. Joseph decided to test his brothers. He said to his brothers coldly, "You are spies who came to spy on us in Egypt." The brothers hurriedly defended themselves, saying that they were forced by the famine, and mentioned that there was a young brother Benjamin and an elderly father at home. Joseph pretended not to believe it. He detained Simeon and asked the other brothers to go home and bring Benjamin to prove their words. The brothers returned home and told their father Jacob all this. Jacob was heartbroken. He had lost Joseph and now he was going to lose Simeon. He even had to risk sending Benjamin to Egypt. This made him feel like a knife in his heart. However, the famine became more and more serious. In the end, Jacob could only agree with tears to let Benjamin go to Egypt with his brothers again. This time, Joseph saw Benjamin, and his inner emotions surged like a flood. But he still suppressed it and continued his temptation. After the dinner, Joseph ordered someone to put a silver cup in Benjamin's bag and then sent people to chase the brothers, accusing them of stealing. The brothers were stunned and insisted that they were innocent, but the silver cup really appeared in Benjamin's bag. The brothers fell into despair. They returned to Joseph and begged for his forgiveness. At this time, Judah stood up and begged Joseph to let Benjamin go and was willing to stay in his place. He said that his father had already lost a son, and if he lost Benjamin again, he would probably die of grief. Joseph was moved by Judah's plea, and he could no longer suppress his emotions. Joseph finally cried to his brothers with tears in his eyes, "I am Joseph. I am your brother Joseph." The brothers were shocked, ashamed, and afraid. Joseph forgave his brothers and asked them to take his father Jacob and the whole family to Egypt for refuge. Jacob was so excited to learn that Joseph was still alive that he moved his family to Egypt and lived in the land of Goshen arranged for them by Pharaoh, and spent his later years in Egypt in peace. Through this story, Joseph's magnanimity and trusting God are also shown.